Uh, Hi, everybody, and thanks to Hari, Yashoda, and this extremely impressive assemblage to go through these extremely exciting topics. The topic for today is this particular entity, which has become both provocative, at the same time is very futuristic, and so we'll discuss in the next few minutes what do we have at this space. The overview of today's 15 minutes we have will be based on the genesis of this entity because it's not familiar to most of us in the country. The concept of single-use bronchoscopy compared to reusable bronchoscopy, look at the currently available options out there, go through some conclusions, which fortunately in the earlier stage of any science, you can make your own comments and give your own perspectives, and then some take-home points as to where are we headed. Considering this is such a futuristic session, this will be interesting as a template to see what people think and where the science is headed. So the history of bronchoscopy, as was talked about in the morning at length, has been quite slow, actually. Slow and very tedious, and it's taken its own time. And the flexible component came very late. And after that, it's been quite slow compared to the rest of the technological revolution over the last 5 decades. What did we see? We saw more video scopes. We saw more sizes and working channels, and it was so nicely shown by Dr. Pallav Shah on what is there in the landscape right now. High definition, we could see better, and this was also the focus of the last few talks. Flexibility became a big thing. Four-way rotation, which came to gastroenterology, which wasn't with us, and then we saw this appearing in our own scopes. And then ultimately, it just looked like a jazzier, more palatable product which was easier to use and just seemed to make bronchology more interesting. So that has been the developments of the last few decades, actually. And so we switched that, and for the Indian guys, you know, there's a Maruti car and that's a BMW, and that's what we've been trying to buy over the last few years, being impressed as our eyes grew wider. But ultimately, we realized that it's not easy. Once you buy it, that's not the end of the story. They're expensive, repair costs, and everybody will nod their heads, whoever's running an administrative component over here. You can't have the whole range. You can't keep replacing. And when you buy a 5 and you buy a 3, there's a 4 in the middle, which comes a little better, and you can't get into it all the time. And then at least in countries like ours, and I'm pretty sure in the days I was in the US, this was also there, training became a problem because of the fragility, the difficulty to obtain, the difficulty to maintain, the difficulty to procure, and the difficulty to update. So these have always been major challenges when it comes to these scopes. So let's be critical. If we look at ourselves insightfully, what are the drawbacks of currently available reusable bronchoscopes? And reusable term has been interesting because of the single-use concept now. Well, we use this thing called the MAF scope, which Olympus had, but it went only so far. In India, for donkey's years, and still significantly in the most parts of the country, fiber scopes are still being used, the eyepiece ones. Infection control and immaculate cleaning with the residue of bugs, viruses, things like COVID-19, prions, and protein have been the focus of the last few years, and my more famous namesake, Dr. Atul Mehta, has been talking a lot on this. Then, of course, comes availability in what's called webinars, when it's so difficult to find the people to move the infrastructure down, and this was also exemplified in COVID. And then, of course, staffing issues related to all these will be very challenging intuitively. So this, as we talked before, again, is reiterated. In high-volume setups, efficiency, movement, rapidity, availability, service all became a problem. And all of these things are definitely been an issue when we try to build up our bronchoscopy suites, increase service, increase training, and more importantly, go cross-functional across intensive care units and across systems. So this is what we bought. This is what we did, took the whole system down, the fiber scopes and so on. But clearly, there has been a lacuna in the last 2 or 3 decades. So is this an option? Are these single-use scopes, and these are a few, there's so many of them in the market right now. Are these an option is what came in the landscape, and we shall be reviewing the developments and technical aspects, which is most of the content, most of the focus of the talk. Advantages, it's intuitive. I don't need to let this crowd know. We made the case with the critical aspects of the reusable scopes. You can shift easily. You have off-hour convenience. The infection control part of it is so relevant and so pertinent in this. And of course, you can train easier. And now when we're trying to walk away from live cases and do more and more of cadaveric work, it may be a big advantage to have these scopes in an armamentarium. The main inflection point in COVID has been make for so many, break for so many, but for at least these disposable scopes, as you can see the numbers, COVID led to both a quick rediscovery, quick application, massive dissemination, and ultimately reset the whole bar at a different level of understanding and usage. So now when you look at the data, and the papers go back over the last 5 to 6 years, the infection control part of it between the multiple use and single use bronchoscopes has been the main claim to fame, as we said. The current ones in the market, we've shown one picture from what's available in the literature. You can see the multiple names over there. What I have not covered is STORS. There's something called HugeMed. Olympus is coming out. In fact, for me, this talk has been an exploration of how many of them out there. And I'm amazed that they probably are competing just with the navigation systems and putting us both into this flurry of what's called over-decision making as we try to figure out what to buy. So in this paper, they tried to do a comparison to make our life easier. And there they looked at all these scopes. And currently, we've got quite a few in the Indian market also. And they looked at the weight of Vathin, which is there, which displayed in the hall over there. It's the heaviest. But what is heaviest, ladies and gentlemen? 170 grams. It's actually light as hell, if I can use colloquiality in our conversations, because the average weight of a reusable scope is 900 grams. So indeed, they make these scopes much easier to handle. What about other specifications? Well, they've looked at field of view, where Pentax scores. They've looked at rotatable function and suction port rotatability, which makes it so convenient. Those little irritants, those small nuances in bronchoscopy, which you and I ignored, where our professors told us just shut up, be quiet, and suck it up, have been actually improved on the technical specifications when you come to all these scopes. When you look at other aspects over there, variety and range, which we have struggled for ages. Historically, all of us started with 1 or 2 scopes, built up our armamentarium, and it's been a very challenging process to put it through administration, capexes, and justify them. Here you have a whole range all the way from the highest 6 millimeter or so, all to the lowest, which is as low as 2 to 3 millimeters. So in other choice areas, bronchoscopist choice, females and smaller hand size people preferred the Pentax because of grip, and males preferred the BronchoFlex. So all these things which I have never dwelt on in the last many years in bronchology have been looked at in these single-use scopes. What about technical aspects like scope angulation? Turns out they're doing a great job. They're going 180 front, 180 behind, which has been, which has taken the regular scopes years to achieve. And the current ones are even looking at a 220 angulation and more. So these are amazing when it comes to the flexibility they're offering you. What about other areas? Well, currently the AMBU scope, which is going to get demonstrated today, has also added the rotatable function, and it's also giving you another feature which we'll be talking about. In the real-world setting, in this paper, in this year, 30 participants were asked to, or 40 participants were asked to rate the ergonomics and comfort, and they put these all over there, and people preferred BronchoFlex. So what have we been talking? Last few slides have been the fact that interesting features, ease of use, comfort, ergonomics, all have been looked at in a very different way compared to the prior scopes. For example, none of the prior speakers will ever talk of these aspects when they talk the next generation, Olympus, Pentax, or more. What about the real-world setting? Well, it turns out that when you look at all these aspects of assessment to quality to maneuverability and so on, Vathin scored better on these aspects. So what did I show you? I've shown you a lot of data to say various aspects have been looked at by various people in different ways and what are the preferences. What about suction capability? Turns out the Boston one can take the pseudomucus, which is close to the forceps, and suction that the best. So even that has been looked at carefully. Recently, AMBU, which is being marketed now, has added the closed-loop suction. So over there, you don't have to disconnect it all. Between the wall suction and this little suction trap, you can just tweak a little lever, and the same operator without assistance can do a suction maneuver. So what about bronchoscopist's perspective on single-use flexible bronchoscopists? Well, they liked it. Most people, look at these numbers. Most people are saying they're good, they're comfortable, they do the job, and between technical success, clinical endpoints, and overall comfort, they've been quite happy. So what are the realistic limitations of these scopes and what are the controversies? Well, single-use cost is still considerable, and this is clearly work in evolution, perspective, and finally depends on which country you're sitting, who's the administrator, what is the cost of healthcare, and how do you deliver healthcare when it comes to bronchology. So in some setups, it's going to be useful. In a country like India, where the cost of the single-use scope is probably more than the cost of the entire procedure, it's going to be a little challenging to figure out where to use these scopes, despite the massive variety, great features, lovely technicalities, and so many other features which they are offering. What about other limitations? The images and quality shades. A lot of work was done by the last speakers talking of the nuances of how you're seeing. Just forget about all that. We're not ready for that right now. Therapeutic work, which we love, and Pallav said that that's what the whole focus is going towards, which we agree. That's the fun, that's the value, and that's the next level stuff which we do. Limited. But is that written in stone? No, probably if the same talk is taken a year or two later, you'll see a lot more therapeutic work possible, which is already there in some of the scopes. So the question that comes up very provocatively is single use the same as disposable or no? And that is a challenge. Originally made for single use, not even multiple use per patient. Single use, the question is, and extrapolated to disposable, this probably will not stand the test of time in our country is the concern. Do we actually have a use and throw DNA? And I know that Suvir, when he last took his talk in NAPCON, actually said it's very painful to take a scope and throw it out. It's not easy. So will that actually happen for all the endpoints which the scope has been touted for? Will they also be cleaned and reused till technical limits to justify costs? A no-no, a big no-no when you look at the infection control data. But in lower risk areas, you went to the operation theater, barely a look and came out, a clean patient. Will that be something we have to rethink so as to try and make these work in a model which is useful to us? And finally, I put this statement, is this possible? Or am I just basically shooting through my mouth? And is this preposterous and we should never think about it? But all this is work in progress, which may actually help to increase both the leverage, the dissemination, and the impact of these scopes. If we think of reusability in our country, and I have to use the Indian word called jugaad, which says everything, it basically means that we figure out how to take an expensive, useful item and make it useful to us by trying to do tweaking. And formally, a practice which was done for quite a while, quietly under the radar, was put into a publication landscape by PGI colleagues when they reused an EBUS needle. So something we all were quietly gulping down and wondering how to do, what to do, or maybe we were doing, and I can't say it on a public forum. But this was happening, and it was put in there with appropriate infection control tests done to justify it. Is that true for single-use bronchoscopes? May not be. It's work in progress, because if you do the highest level of infection checking, you may have trouble. Can this science go ahead? Obviously, and we ourselves are trying to look at if we can do molecular studies on them in some sort of model to justify a little extended use to make the single-use concept more meaningful so that we can have better penetration in our setups. Other interesting aspects in scope comparisons, I have never seen such slicing and dicing. As I said, except for looking at the latest new nodulology, where each thing is looked at so carefully, all these aspects, turning angle, an envelope, especially in the upper lobe, something if you didn't do, you are an inferior scopist. Now you know that it's not only you, it could be the equipment also. What about size range? When you look at turning, it's also with the forceps and without the forceps, which is a whole world of a difference. Flexion extension, all of these put together, suction ease, handling ease, rough use, suction switch, which is happening with the Ambu scope, interventional work, high definition, data capture, data storage, Bluetooth, and other specialty usage. Basically, the scope is being looked at with absolutely a fine-tooth comb sort of approach so as to justify the various ones in the market. And I think this is a single entity where competition suddenly with 6 or 7 have spurred such innovations that we have been surprised at the speed of developments in the bronchology space. So no doubt it is here to disrupt the landscape. Potential and innovative areas include, apart from what we covered already with the standard stuff, where the stakes are high, transplant, we know that people are using it over there, immunocompromised patients, where it's going to be very important to have the best infection control, operation theaters, and I think those guys jumped on the bandwagon way before we did, and that's where the major penetration of these scopes have been, where it's super urgent and time matters, and the when-as, ICU, emergency rooms, and codes. When the regular scope is out for repairs, all of us have literally formed relationships and begged the companies sometimes when in the original days we didn't have scopes. So when they're out for repairs and these scopes are going to be a great stand-in, in fact, maybe a substitute so that work gets done and seamless patient care is possible. Where expense and tech is an issue. For example, if I can't invest such a large amount of money, I don't want to convert to dollars, but for the Indians, you know that 20 lakhs and so is the cost of a scope. And so if you don't want to put that in, you can start with these smaller scopes, lesser cost, and that may make a world of a difference in you trying to take this science. So the concept of community bronchoscopy, second-tier cities, third-tier levels, and other areas may really, really increase with this sort of scope approach. So the potential is vast, may help bronchoscopy to reach the hinterlands, which has currently been the purview of few and fairly exclusive when it comes to practice. So the future lies in, I think, hybrid bronchoscopy suites, coexist, develop, look at things in a very collaborative fashion where reusable, flexible scopes plus these single-use scopes will be there. Will the single-use be a primary use? An adjunctive use where it is adding to something, and I think if this video plays, I'll show you, or a substitute use, as we talked about, is going to be the various areas where we can look at it. And ultimately, don't forget, we're not the only ones. They're making the scopes for the nose, rhino, GI, cystoscopy, so they may be part of what's called disposable endoscopy suites. I don't think we have an option. It's going to come here to stay, and we just have to figure out how to use it correctly. I'm not sure, you can play that video somehow? If you just click on it. Okay, if you see, this is a complex post-stenosis with a foreign body below that. We tried this dramatic stuff. It's been there for 4 years, so we tried to gently balloon it to get a peek into what we can do. It's a middle lobe area. It's a middle lobe area. We were trying to save the middle lobe and get the foreign body, and then we're stuck. We have a 2.8 millimeter scope. The fibers are horrible, and there's nothing we could do. Bingo, the solution was the Imager, the Vathin scope, which we have with us. We put that, you can see the clear images, the foreign body seen with that. So the 3.2 millimeter scope over there helped us as a bridging scope to try and see this. A forceps went through this foreign body was extricated, and the job was done. So that is why multiple rows, and typically, bronchologists, given an instrument, will take the usage of the instrument above and beyond what the manufacturer envisages, and this is what we often see in the science. So this is an interesting and exciting aspect of what's coming in this space. You can stop the video now. You can see that middle lobe nicely opened up, and not trying to show all that stuff anyway. Okay, so ultimately to understand that we were used to the Mont Blanc, and it took us a long time in the third world and in our setups also to get the Mont Blanc. But these pens write as well. They do a lovely job. In COVID, we used all of these extensively. These are part of our lives. So maybe it's time to figure out that this is the way our science is going to go. We've tagged behind other sciences quite a bit, but SUFBs, I think, which have come in a rush, are expanding like crazy, are here to stay. We just have to figure out their role and how to utilize them. So to summarize this talk, they're changing the landscape of flexible bronchoscopy with a lot of the advantages we talked about. Different types of SUFPs, though what I showed you, ultimately you have to decide what works for you. It's not much of a difference, and they keep changing anyway. Good part is what you like today, you can change in a year because it's not too expensive. Next-gen scopes are coming, and I think they're going to put ultrasounds on these scopes also, which is going to make, again, a game-changer sort of difference. India has these types over there with minor advantages. You can walk over there, or these are the settings which we talked about. More clinical data for these scopes will help in choosing the optimal scope based on requirement. At this time, I think it's even Steven with minor advantages, but the landscape will keep changing depending on the rapid R&D. And ladies and gentlemen, the R&D has proceeded in this area more rapidly than we have ever seen in our 4 to 5 decades of bronchology. Thank you very much. This is the current hybrid suite. You can see how the portable scopes or the SUFBs have put their imprint or their place next to the regular scopes. Thank you very much and have a lovely meeting.